This is a short presentation that goes along with Chapter 32, The Politics of Boom and Bust. This is post-World War I and the roaring 1920s, and we're going to be going through three presidents. We're going to talk about Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover, three one-term presidents of the 1920s. This is a fairly short presentation. I want to leave time for Chapter 33 and the Great Depression. Just a reminder that all the videos and images within this PowerPoint are in the public domain. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email or give me a call. Thank you. So as we said, 1920s, we're going to start off with Warren Harding. These are all one-term presidents. Warren Harding, who brought his gang from Ohio, president from Ohio, Republican president, and then we have his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, who became president when Harding died, and we'll talk about his strange death, and then Herbert Hoover, who became very popular during World War I, in charge of the Food Administration, supplying the troops during World War I. Herbert Hoover is judged and sometimes unfairly blamed for the crash of 1929. The crash occurs, the great stock market crash of 1929, ushering in the Great Depression of the 1930s. But we start with Warren Harding, and then Calvin Coolidge, and then we end with Herbert Hoover, the three one-term presidents of the roaring 1920s. As we start off with Harding, I wanted to call your attention to this website and this short story here. It's about a 4-minute story broadcast on NPR on July 29, 2014. And this is a story about the steamy love letters that Harding was writing to his mistress that most recently were revealed. So listen to this entertaining story, and then we'll talk more briefly about Harding.
It got a little steamy at the Library of Congress today. Make that downright racy. A collection of love letters was made available to the public after being sealed for half a century. The paramour with the pen was the 29th President Warren Harding. He was not a very popular president. He died before completing his first term. But boy could he write. And he did for 15 years to his mistress. NPR's national political correspondent Don Gagne took a look at some of the love letters, and even he blushed.
In the most stately setting of the Library of Congress, a single cardboard box sits on a long table in a conference room just off the ornate main lobby.
This is just a box of Harding's letters to Carrie Phillips, pulled almost at random.
Some letters are on plain paper, some on hotel stationery, some on U.S. Senate letterhead. All written by Harding, who was married, and all were sent to his longtime paramour, Carrie Fulton Phillips, who was also married to a close friend of Harding's. Our guide is James Hudson, Chief Archivist of the Manuscript Division at the Library of Congress.
The collection contains about 1,000 pages of letters, pages that is, and approximately 106 letters.
Yes, many of the letters are very long. 5 pages, 16 pages, 24 pages.
There are some letters as long as 40 pages.
The letters to his mistress cover politics and current events, including Harding's alarm over her support for Germany in the years leading up to World War I. But the romantic stuff is in there for those willing to slog through page after page of sometimes barely legible handwritten scrawl. Now, this isn't exactly 50 Shades of Gray, but the letters would have been very scandalous in their day, and even today. I enlisted my colleague Brian Naylor to read a few passages. He added some special effects to help set the time period. Brace yourself.
January 28, 1912. I love your poise of perfect thighs. When they hold me in paradise, I love the rose your garden grows. Love seashell pink that over it glows.
It's enough to make you blush or cringe or chuckle. It goes on.
If I had you today, I'd kiss and fondle you into my arms and hold you there until you said, Warren, oh, Warren, in a benediction of blissful joy.
Then there's this one from September of 1913, recalling a tryst in a hotel room.
Wouldn't you like to make the suspected occupant of the next room jealous of the joys he could not know, as we did in morning communion at Richmond?
There are also letters full of jealousy, insecurity, and bickering. Ultimately, James Hudson at the Library of Congress says it's possible all of this could spark interest in Harding's presidency more broadly, which doesn't mean Warren G. Harding will suddenly climb the rankings of U.S. presidents. He still doesn't crack the top 40 out of 44. But if people do start seeing him as something other than a bland figure in U.S. history, then, well, who knows? Don Gagne, NPR News, Washington.
All right, so that's Warren Harding in a story reported on NPR July 29th. All right, so that is NPR's report in July of 2014. So this is a lot of the stories that they were, or some of the letters that they were reading were before Harding was president, but Harding was interesting kind of a character. He was known to play poker during Prohibition in the White House and drink heavily with the Attorney General of the United States, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to look at this on the evening of August 1923. Harding was resting comfortably in a room in a hotel, and he was discovered. Let's see here. A calm review of a calm man. The article suggested that Harding was doing a good job, and the president, despite all the criticism. That's good, he said. Go on and read some more. When Mrs. Harding finished, she went to her own room across the hall, and the president remained as she left him, sitting propped up on his bed. His eyes were shut, head back on the pillow, and a nurse in attendance, and then suddenly at about 7:30, he had a seizure, and his mouth fell open, and he fell lifelessly to his side. So the president died. Now, there's a lot of other things going on here. The doctor, it's a Dr. Sawyer. Dr. Sawyer and the other doctors issued a statement saying that Harding had died of apoplexy, a term that was used as a stroke. But modern studies indicate this was a massive heart attack. The actual cause has never been ascertained because Mrs. Harding did not permit an autopsy, and the body was embalmed immediately. Now, a year later, this doctor died unexpectedly when Mrs. Harding visited him, and within 6 months, she was dead too. So was this a Shakespearean tragedy? Was Mrs. Harding, the speculation was, is Mrs. Harding potentially involving her friend, the doctor, to help maybe quicken or hasten Harding's death, because maybe she discovered that he was having an affair, and were in fact Mrs. Harding and the doctor involved somehow. And then did Mrs. Harding visit the doctor, and because maybe the doctor was having second thoughts and maybe threatening to talk about it, why did he die unexpectedly? Was Mrs. Harding involved somehow? The speculation was Mrs. Harding involved somehow in Harding's death, or in fact the doctor's death? But strangely enough, Harding dies in office, and his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, takes over. One of the other disturbing things that happened during Harding's administration was the Teapot Dome scandal, and of course he had no trouble with my enemies. I can take care of my enemies all right. It's my friends that keep me walking up at night. Harding brought his gang of friends from Ohio, and these two individuals in particular, well, Albert Fall specifically, caused him a lot of grief, and the scam that surrounded the Secretary of Navy and the Teapot Dome scandal. Teapot Dome scandal, Albert Fall persuaded Secretary of Navy Edwin Denby to transfer control of the Navy oil to his department as Secretary of Interior. And Fall granted private leases of this oil to various friends. So the Teapot Dome reserves in Wyoming were leased out, and in return Fall received personal loans, cash, cattle, and other financial incentives. So this came out. The United States Navy was kind of in the process of switching from coal-powered engines to oil, and so this became quite a lucrative kind of trade. And it's called Teapot Dome because the land here, had this rock formation, and some people felt like it looked a bit like a teapot. So this is the Teapot Dome scandal. And it's oil. Oil was kind of at the root of this scandal, and Albert Fall, Secretary of the Interior, was part of this. So after Harding's death, we had the Teapot Dome scandal, then Harding's death. Calvin Coolidge becomes president, Silent Cal, and 4 very quiet years. And then we move into the election of 1928, and we have Hoover running. Silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge, only is president for 4 years, and does not even seek, well, I guess he's president for 5 years, but 1 full term, and does not seek election into a second full term. So Hoover runs as the Republican against Al Smith. Al Smith is known for his bringing back, he wanted to bring back alcohol and end prohibition. He was a Roman Catholic, so Romanism and ruin were used to describe Al Smith in 1928. So Al Smith was the first Roman Catholic to actually receive the presidential nomination from a party, major party, and the next presidential candidate then to actually become president that was a Catholic is Kennedy. But this is the first, and this receives some criticism because at least those detractors, the detractors from Al Smith would say that if Al Smith became president, then in fact the United States would become subordinate to Catholicism or subordinate to the Pope. And this is probably something that was not ever considered too seriously, but it was enough to call attention to the fact, don't vote for a Catholic if the Catholic is supposed to be subordinate to the Pope. Does the United States become subordinate to the Pope? Anyway, that's the election of 1928. Hoover, needless to say, Hoover becomes the president, and Al Smith loses. Al Smith's running mate was Roosevelt. Or I should say, Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was the leading Democrat to nominate and to actually put Al Smith's name on the ballot to nominate him at the Democrat convention. So Roosevelt was not Al Smith's running mate, but needless to say, then Roosevelt becomes president in 1932. So Hoover becomes president 1928, and he is then inaugurated or sworn in November of 1929, and very shortly after that, this catastrophic crash occurs, the great stock market crash. So he is in office for less than 6 months, and 5,000 banks collapse within the first 3 years. Within the first 3 years of Hoover's administration. The nation's ability to produce goods clearly had outrun its capacity to consume or pay for them over expansion of credit and the installation plan buying and the overstimulation of production. You also then have this depression in America giving further downward push by this chain reaction, a collapse in Europe. And so that kind of ushers in the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, there's plenty other things to talk about in the 1920s, but I want to reserve the time for the Great Depression. Remember that there's Prohibition, there's the rise of gangsterism, Al Capone, and this idea of bootlegging, alcohol. You also have the Jazz Age and the rise of Harlem, Renaissance in New York. A lot of things that are in your chapter. Please spend some time reading through the chapter. If you have any questions about this presentation or other aspects of the chapter, please do not hesitate to give me a call or an email. That concludes this presentation. Thank you.